Know your place!
The slap came before I understood what was happening. A sharp, ugly crack that cut through the music, through the laughter, through every expensive perfume in that ballroom. My head turned hard to the left. My neck burned. My ears rang. And for 3 full seconds, I could not breathe. 200 guests went completely silent. I had been standing at the edge of the dessert table when Mrs. Yoon crossed the room. She moved like she owned every inch of it, because she believed she did. Her diamond bracelet caught the chandelier light as her hand came down. The sound it made against my cheek was louder than I expected. She lowered her hand slowly, like she was setting down something she no longer needed. "Know your place," she said. The microphone stand was close. Her voice carried easily to every corner of the room. The orchestra conductor froze with his bow in the air. A waiter somewhere behind me stopped pouring champagne. I touched my cheek. My fingers were cold. Then something landed inside me, quiet and still. Not shame, not fear. Something older and harder than both. I had been born in Mombasa to a dockworker's daughter. I had carried heavier things than this. I did not fall. The silence did not last long enough for dignity. Mrs. Yoon cleared her throat and stepped closer to the microphone, like she was about to give a prepared speech. Maybe she was. Maybe she had planned this moment the way powerful people plan everything, with patience and with pleasure. "This woman," she began, and the way she said those 2 words made my skin feel tight, "was hired by our household as domestic staff." Murmurs moved through the tables like a slow wave. "She cleaned our floors. She folded our laundry." Mrs. Yoon paused for effect, and I could see her enjoying every second. She confused kindness with invitation, invitation with belonging. I looked at my husband, Jiho. He was standing 5 feet away from me, close enough to touch, close enough to speak. His face was smooth and unreadable. He looked at the floor. He looked at his glass. He looked at anything except me. "She is not my daughter-in-law," Mrs. Yoon said clearly. "She is a mistake my son is correcting." Soft laughter scattered across the tables. Not everyone laughed, but enough did. Security was already moving toward me from the side door. I breathed in. I breathed out. I had been through storms before. I knew what they looked like from the inside. I walked through the crowd the way my father had taught me to walk through anything hard. Back straight. Eyes forward. No apologies written on your face for things you did not do. The ballroom felt longer than I remembered. The tables stretched out on both sides, rows of faces watching me move toward the door. Some looked away when I met their eyes. Some did not bother to hide their curiosity. A few, not many, looked uncomfortable, like they wished they could do something but had already decided not to. My cheek was burning. Behind me, I could hear Mrs. Yoon returning to her story. Something about the importance of protecting family legacy. Something about the dangers of outsiders. The orchestra started again before I even reached the hallway. That hit me harder than the slap, because it said everything. It said that what had just happened was simply another moment in the evening. One course between the fish and the dessert, a small interruption that had already been resolved and filed away. I pushed through the heavy double doors and stepped into the cold soul night. I had no coat. I had no phone. I had no car. But I had the one thing Mrs. Yoon had been trying to strip from me all night. I still knew exactly who I was. Within 48 hours, my life had been carefully disassembled. My bank cards failed at the pharmacy on Tuesday morning. I stared at the small machine while the pharmacist looked at me with a kind of patient pity that was almost worse than rudeness. I tried twice. I walked out without the medicine. The apartment fingerprint lock rejected me that afternoon. The Yoon family attorney arrived at the studio I was renting by Thursday evening. He handed me a thick white envelope without looking at me. Inside were divorce papers, already filed. No note, no phone call from Jiho, just a manila folder and a receipt for registered delivery. By Friday, the Korean business press had a story. The headline used the word manipulation. It called me a foreign national with unclear employment history. It talked about my past as domestic staff in the Yoon household. It was 3 paragraphs long, and every sentence was technically careful and entirely designed to destroy my name. They did not mention that I had spent 18 months rebuilding Park Global's East African shipping strategy. They did not mention that I had increased port efficiency by 31%. They did not mention those things because those things were inconvenient. Power does not need to lie about everything. It only needs to control which truths get told first. My name is Amara Okoye. I was born in Mombasa to a father who worked the container docks from the time he was 17 years old. His hands were rough, and his clothes always smelled faintly of the sea. He worked for honest wages, and he came home every evening, and he sat at the same table and told me the same things. He said, "Never bow lower than your conscience allows." He said, "A person's worth lives inside them, not in the rooms they are permitted to enter." He said, "One day what you know will matter more than where you came from." My father was not a powerful man in the way the world measures power. He did not own buildings or hold titles. But he was trusted on those docks the way very few people are trusted anywhere, completely, without condition. 7 years before my wedding night, there was a port ambush. Rival smugglers, real violence, a foreign businessman caught in the middle of something he had no part in. My father hid the man inside a cargo container and redirected the attackers. He stayed calm while armed men shouted outside. The businessman survived. My father never told me the man's name. He did not think it was important. I thought about that story a lot in the days after the slap. I thought about it even more when I found out who the businessman was. I had seen Kang Min-jae twice before the night of the slap. The first time was at a pre-wedding business dinner 3 months earlier. He arrived late, sat at the far end of the table, and said very little. People around him spoke more carefully when he was in the room. Not because he was loud, because he was the opposite of loud in a way that made everyone else feel exposed. The second time was at the gala itself, seated alone at a round table near the back wall. No entourage, no companion, a glass of water in front of him untouched. He did not applaud Mrs. Yoon's speech. He did not look away when she raised her hand. He watched the slap the way a person watches something they have been half expecting. Calm. Attentive, like he was filing the information somewhere useful. And then he watched me walk through those 200 guests. I did not know he was watching. I was focused only on not letting my legs shake. But later, people who were in that room told me what they saw. They said he watched me the entire length of that ballroom. They said that when the doors closed behind me, he set down his water glass slowly. They said his expression did not change, but something behind his eyes did. I returned to the only thing I knew how to do when the world closed its doors. I worked. I rented a single room above a restaurant in a neighborhood where no one knew my name or my former address. The landlord was a quiet older woman who asked only for rent in advance. The room had one window and one chair and a fold-out table. I put my degree certificates in a folder under the bed. I got a job cleaning tables at a noodle shop 3 streets away. The owner was a retired merchant sailor who had worked ports across Southeast Asia. He did not ask questions. He paid cash. He made terrible coffee and left a cup of it for me every morning before I started my shift. I told myself this was temporary. I told myself I was gathering my breath, but I was also watching and listening and thinking. 3 weeks after the slap, a customer left a wallet on a corner table late on a rainy Tuesday evening. I almost missed it. The restaurant was empty and I was wiping down chairs. I picked it up and looked inside to find a name for the lost and found slip. The name was Kang Min-jae. Inside the wallet, thick foreign currency, 2 black credit cards, and a private office card with a handwritten address on the back. I sat down in a chair. Then I put on my coat and walked to the address. The building was glass and steel and completely silent at that hour. A security guard at the front desk made 1 phone call and then rode the elevator with me to the 32nd floor without speaking. The hallway smelled of cold air and something like expensive paper. There were no decorations on the walls. No art. Nothing that needed to be there except the things that served a function. Kang Min-jae was standing by the window when the door opened. He was taller than I remembered. He turned when I came in and looked at me with the same calm attention I had seen at the gala. I placed the wallet on the desk between us. "You are Okoye's daughter," he said. It was not a question. My throat tightened. "You knew my father. He saved my life in Mombasa." He looked at the wallet and then back at me. I have been repaying that debt for years. I was not sure I would find the right recipient. I did not understand what he meant. Not yet. You took nothing from the wallet, he said. It wasn't mine. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I know what they did to you. I know what they are still doing. He gestured to the chair across from him. Sit, he said. I want to show you something. He did not speak about revenge. That was the first thing that surprised me. I had expected anger, the kind powerful men carry like a weapon they are always ready to pull out. Instead, he spoke about information, about systems, about the difference between an empire built on appearance and one built on real foundation. What do you want? He asked at one point. The question caught me off balance. No one had asked me that in a very long time. People had been telling me what I was allowed to want for years. Not revenge, I said slowly. I had to think about why. Revenge is about them. What happened to me is about something bigger. The truth. The record. What was real and what was stolen. He was quiet for a moment. I thought I had said the wrong thing. Then something shifted in his face, very small, like a window opening in a wall. Correction, he said. Yes. Revenge is loud, he said. Correction is permanent. One of them makes noise. The other changes the shape of things going forward. He stood and walked to a cabinet along the wall. He opened it. Inside was a series of folders, each labeled with different divisions of Park Global. Your name is on more of these than you know, he said. I leaned forward. The folders told a story that took me 2 full nights to read completely. Kang's team had been building the picture for months. Forensic accountants, cyber analysts who worked quietly and left no trace, legal strategists who specialized in international corporate structures. What they had found inside Park Global was not just careless management. It was a machine. Shell companies registered in Singapore that existed only on paper, pulling management fees from real divisions. A charity in Zurich that received regular transfers but had no verifiable programs and no audited accounts. Ghost payroll entries in a Manila subsidiary. Names attached to salaries, but no employment records, no tax filings, no evidence of actual human beings. And underneath all of it, bribery. Payments to port officials in 3 countries, records of deals made and favors exchanged with people who controlled shipping routes that Park Global needed. The empire was not built on good strategy. The empire was built on theft, held together by the silence of people who had been paid to look away. I thought about the 18 months I had spent building their East African operations. Nights at the desk, trips to Nairobi and Dar es Salaam. Relationships built carefully over time with harbor masters and logistics directors. All of it had been used to make their dirty machine run cleaner. My honest work had been a cover for their corruption. I read that paragraph 3 times. There was one thing Kang showed me that I had not known. 18 months before the wedding slap, before I had any reason to suspect what was coming, Kang Holdings had begun acquiring small minority shares in Park Global. Quietly. Through layered investment vehicles that were perfectly legal and completely invisible to anyone who was not specifically looking. The shares were not in Kang's name. They were registered under a legal holding structure. Under my name. He had started building this before I even understood there was something to build. He explained it carefully. He had known about my father's story for years. He had been watching the Yoon family's treatment of my work for longer than I realized. When Mrs. Yoon began steering the marriage toward a place where I would be erased, Kang had already started quietly repositioning. You were learning the math, he said. I simply made sure it would count. I stared at the ownership documents for a long time. Why? I asked. You did not know me. I knew your father, he said simply. And I watched you walk through that ballroom without trembling. He paused. People who do not break under that kind of pressure are rare, he said. I have been building things for 20 years. I know exactly what I am looking at. The weeks that followed were harder than I expected. Not because of the work. The work was the easy part. I had spent my entire career learning how to think carefully and move quietly. I understood numbers. I understood port logistics. I understood how to trace money through structures designed to hide it. What was hard was the silence. Reporters contacted me 3 times in the first 2 weeks. Each time I declined to speak. Kang had advised it. Not because we had anything to hide, but because timing in these situations matters as much as truth. A story released too early burns the evidence before the fire reaches what you are actually trying to correct. Former contacts at Park Global posted things online. Carefully worded things. The kind that do not technically say anything false, but arrange the truth in a shape that damages you. I read one of them at midnight in my small room above the restaurant. I put the phone down. I looked at the ceiling. My father's voice came to me very clearly. Power grows best in silence, Amara. Loud people are showing you where they are. Quiet people are showing you where they are going. I picked the phone back up. I went back to work. The record was being built. The case was being built. Every document Kang's team found was being verified and copied and secured. We were not waiting. We were preparing. 3 weeks after the slap, Park Global held another gala. Mrs. Yoon had planned it as a celebration, expansion into Southeast Asian markets, new partnerships, a formal announcement of growth strategies. She had hired the same ballroom, the same orchestra, the same catering company. The invitation list had been carefully managed to exclude me. She wore a red dress with a high collar and a diamond necklace that I recognized from her portrait in the main hallway of the Yoon estate. She stood at the front of the room as guests arrived and accepted congratulations with the ease of someone who has never doubted their own position. I was not there. Not yet. Kang arrived alone, 30 minutes into the evening, through the main entrance. He was wearing a dark suit. He did not have security flanking him, which was unusual and I learned later, deliberate. He wanted to walk in looking like just another guest. He wanted the room to settle before anything happened. Conversations dropped as people recognized him. He crossed the room slowly, greeting no one, refusing no one, stopping at nothing. He accepted a glass of water from a passing tray. He looked around the room with those calm, attentive eyes. Mrs. Yoon saw him from across the room and her smile shifted slightly. Not quite fear, but the beginning of something she had not prepared for. Kang waited until Mrs. Yoon had the microphone. She was mid-sentence, something about vision and legacy and the Yoon family's commitment to excellence, when he moved. He did not interrupt. He walked up to the podium the way you walk towards something that belongs to you, and he held out his hand. Mrs. Yoon looked at his hand. The room watched. She gave him the microphone.
No need for alarm. I'll be brief.
Effective immediately, there will be significant changes to our operational structure. This was not an easy choice, but it is necessary for our future success.
He nodded once toward the back wall. Every large screen in the ballroom lit up simultaneously. Bank transfer records, correspondence marked confidential that was no longer confidential. Offshore account structures mapped clearly, each layer labeled, each connection traced to a name or a date or a payment. The room did not erupt. It went still in a different way than before, the stillness of people who are trying to understand what they are looking at and beginning to realize it is real. Mrs. Yoon's laugh was sharp and short. "This is absurd," she said. But the screens did not change, and then the phones in the room began to buzz. Not one or two. All of them. A wave of vibrations as market alerts and banking notifications moved through the crowd. Accounts frozen. Stock dropping in real time. The air changed. The doors on the right side of the ballroom opened. 2 officers in plain clothes entered first, then 3 uniformed police behind them. They moved without rushing, which was somehow worse than if they had run. Running would have suggested uncertainty. The way they walked said they had already handled everything they needed to handle before they arrived in this room. Board members near the front tables checked their phones and went pale. Mrs. Yoon's husband, a heavy man with a gray part in his hair, reached for his own phone and then stopped himself. Kang did not look at any of them. He looked at me. Because I had just entered through the side door, I had taken care getting ready that evening, not to impress anyone. But because I had learned something from my father that Mrs. Yoon never understood, how you present yourself in a difficult moment tells the room who you believe yourself to be. I wore a navy dress and my grandmother's earrings. My shoulders were straight. Kang's voice was even and clear. Majority shareholding of Park Global has been consolidated under a new controlling interest. He paused. The name on the controlling documents is Amara Okoye. He looked at me. Chairwoman Okoye, he said quietly. The spotlight system, which had been arranged for Mrs. Yoon's presentation, moved slowly toward me. The room tried to make sense of what it was hearing. I watched it happen on their faces. The calculation, the rearranging of everything they thought they knew. 48 hours ago, I had been the discarded foreign maid, the mistake the Yoon son was correcting. Now I was standing in the same ballroom under the same chandeliers being addressed as chairwoman. Mrs. Yoon took one step toward me. "No," she said. The word came out small and stripped of its usual force. Kang spoke without looking at her. "The documents are registered and verified. The legal transfer of controlling interest was finalized at 7:45 this morning. The board has been formally notified." "She cannot," Mrs. Yoon started. "Mathematics does not negotiate," Kang said quietly. I had spent hours the night before preparing for this moment. I had written out exactly what I wanted to say. I had practiced the words until they felt like mine and not like a speech. But standing there, with the light on me and 200 pairs of eyes doing exactly what they had done 3 weeks ago, turning to find me in the room, I understood that the only words that mattered were the true ones. I had helped build this company. The records showed it. The structure Kang had put in place protected it. The Maid owned the empire.
The truth, when spoken without emotion, carries its own weight. We must listen closely to the data.
We have reviewed the evidence. It is clear that the funds were redirected intentionally. Effective immediately.
And every person in that room was beginning to understand it. As the officers secured her wrists, the diamond bracelet slipped. It did not shatter. It did not make a dramatic sound. It simply fell from her wrist and struck the marble floor with a quiet, precise click and lay there, glinting in the chandelier light like something that had lost its purpose. I looked at it. That bracelet had cut my cheek 3 weeks ago. I had felt the edge of it against my skin when her hand came down. I had touched my face afterward and felt the faint line it left. Not deep enough to scar, but sharp enough to remember. Now it lay on the floor, and Mrs. Yoon stood very still with her wrists together and her shoulders curved inward in a shape I had never seen her make before. She looked smaller. Not small in the way she had tried to make me feel small. Small in the way that real things look when the performance around them finally stops. She looked at me once. I held her gaze. I did not feel victory. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was something quieter. The feeling you get when a weight you have been carrying for a long time is finally set down. Not lightness, exactly. Just the absence of something heavy. The officers guided her toward the door. The bracelet stayed on the floor. No one picked it up. The next 72 hours moved faster than I could follow. The stock collapse hit international markets within hours of the gala. Park Global lost 38% of its value by the following morning. The financial press, which had been so eager to run the story about the foreign maid and her manipulation, now had a different kind of story to tell. Bigger, more complicated. With receipts, the investigations spread outward from the original documents. 3 subsidiary directors in Manila submitted voluntary disclosures before arrest warrants could be issued. The shell company structures in Singapore were formally flagged by regional regulators. An international financial crimes unit opened proceedings in Zurich regarding the charity accounts. Mrs. Yoon's husband, whose name appeared on several of the original bribery records, made a public statement through his attorney. The statement said very little and confirmed a great deal. Board members resigned in groups of 2 and 3. Some released their own statements. Some simply disappeared from public view. The headlines transformed as the days moved forward. What had started as a scandal, a dramatic corporate unraveling at a society gala, became something more technical, an exposure, a systemic correction of a company that had been running on theft for years. By the end of the 72nd hour, the Park dynasty had been completely dissolved. Not by chaos, not by violence, by the patient accumulation of true things released at exactly the right moment. Jiho requested a meeting 2 weeks later. He chose a cafe near the old neighborhood, the kind of place that had not changed in 20 years, with wooden chairs and handwritten menus. I was already there when he arrived. He looked thinner. He sat down and ordered nothing. I did not know the full extent of it, he said. I looked at him carefully. I had spent a lot of time thinking about what I wanted from this conversation. Not revenge, not an apology that would cost him nothing to give. You knew enough, I said. You stood in that ballroom and you said nothing. He looked at the table. I was afraid of her. I know, I said, and I did know. I had watched that fear operate in him for years, quiet and corrosive, turning him into someone who chose safety over everything else. That doesn't change what the silence meant to me. He asked if I could forgive him. I thought about my father, who had always said that forgiveness is something you do for yourself, not for the person who wronged you. I'm not carrying what happened to me anymore, I said. That's not the same as forgiveness, but it's what I can honestly give you. I stood and picked up my bag. I hope you find the courage you couldn't find that night, I said. I genuinely do. Then I left. The first thing I did as chairwoman was open the internal audit to every level of the company, not selectively, completely. Every department, every subsidiary, every account that had been locked behind executive access. I hired an independent firm with no previous relationship with Park Global. I gave them full authorization and no deadline pressure. The results took 6 weeks to compile. They were not pleasant reading. Corruption in a company spreads like water damage. It moves into places you did not expect and weakens structures that looked solid from the outside. But we rebuilt. Worker oversight committees were established in every regional office. The representatives were elected by the staff themselves, not appointed from above. Salary structures were reviewed. Several departments had been operating with significant wage gaps that had no justification. Profit-sharing models were introduced. I had seen similar structures work at smaller companies in Nairobi. There was resistance from some of the senior management who remained. I listened to their concerns. I addressed what was legitimate and I was clear about what was not. The company became more transparent. Then it became more efficient. Then it became more profitable than it had ever been under the old structure. This is the part that surprises people the most when I tell this story. They expect me to say the cleanup cost us everything. It did not. Corruption is expensive. Integrity compounds. The numbers showed it clearly within 8 months. I did not return to the Yoon family penthouse. That had never been my home anyway. It had been a place I was permitted to occupy under conditions that were always controlled by someone else. A room with invisible walls. A life I was allowed to perform as long as I followed the rules they had written. I purchased a building in the business district. A 12-story structure that had been sitting half empty for 3 years while its previous owners argued about redevelopment rights. I converted the top 2 floors into the company's new headquarters. Clean lines, natural light, a design that did not try to perform power, but simply made it easy to think clearly. The middle floors became office rental space for small businesses, with pricing structures designed to be accessible to new companies without the capital for prime real estate. The lower 4 floors I converted into residential units for company employees. Below market rent, long-term leases, actual stability. The building filled within 5 months. I stood in the lobby on the opening day, and I looked at the people moving through the space, workers arriving for their shifts, small business owners collecting mail, a woman in the corner with a laptop and 2 children doing homework beside her. I thought about the single room above the restaurant. I thought about the fold-out table and the 1 chair. The maid no longer rented rooms. She redesigned what rooms were for. 1 year after the slap, I stood again in the same ballroom, the same chandeliers, the same marble floors, the same orchestra in the same corner. But the banner above the stage was different. It read, "The Amara Dignity Foundation, supporting migrant workers in workplace abuse." We had been working on the foundation for 6 months before the launch. Kang had helped with the legal structure. A lawyer I trusted, a woman named Zo Won-so, who had spent her career in labor rights, helped me design the program frameworks. We built partnerships with port authorities in 4 East African countries and 3 Korean labor rights organizations. The foundation's work focused specifically on domestic workers and low-wage migrant employees, the people who, like me, often had no documentation of what had been taken from them. No contracts, no witnesses willing to speak, no access to the systems designed to protect them. We built a documentation service, a legal referral network, an emergency housing fund for workers who had to leave dangerous situations without warning. 200 guests filled the ballroom again. As I walked through the door, they rose. Not because someone instructed them to. I watched it happen the way good things sometimes happen. One person standing, then another, until the entire room was on its feet, and the sound of it was warm and real, and nothing at all like the silence of a year ago. I stood at the same microphone where Mrs. Yoon had once told me to know my place. The room was full, and the lights were warm, and I could feel the weight of the moment in my chest, the way you feel things that have cost you something real to arrive at. I had written a speech. I looked at it twice backstage, and then I left it on the table. 1 year ago, I said, I was walked out of this room by security while an orchestra played over the sound of my humiliation. The room held very still. I want to be honest about what that felt like. It felt like an ending. It felt like every system in that room had decided what my value was and arrived at zero. I paused. But humiliation is not a verdict. It is a test. And what it tests is whether you know yourself well enough to keep going when everyone around you has decided you should stop. I thought about my father. I thought about the cargo container and the frightened man inside it and the dock worker who had simply done the right thing without expecting it to matter beyond that moment. Power does not shout, I said. It builds. It corrects. It remembers what was taken and it changes the structure so the taking becomes harder. I looked out at the room. This foundation exists because of every person who was told to know their place and decided that was not enough of an answer. Near the back of the ballroom, Kang Min-jae sat alone at a round table. He had not changed his habits. No entourage. No companion. A glass of water in front of him. He sat with the same still attention I had seen the first night I noticed him. The same calm that did not need to perform itself. He had declined every invitation to share the stage with me, every opportunity to stand beside me at a press moment or appear in a photograph that would have connected his name to the correction of Park Global. He had found ways to deflect each one without making it into a conversation. I had asked him about it once during the long months of rebuilding. You did the work, he had said simply. I provided conditions. Those are different things. You started it, I said. Your father started it, he said. In Mombasa, in a cargo container. I have just been following the debt to where it needed to go. I had not known what to say to that. Sitting in the ballroom now, watching him from the stage, I understood something about the kind of person he was. He was not interested in credit. He was interested in balance, in the correction of scales that had been wrongly weighted for too long. The world calls people like him dangerous, and they are right. But dangerous in the direction of truth is a different kind of danger entirely. I touched my cheek once before I left the ballroom that night. There was no scar. The bracelet had been sharp, but not deep enough to leave a permanent mark. The skin was smooth. I ran one finger across it and felt nothing except my own face, familiar and unchanged. But I remembered everything. I remembered the crack of sound under the chandeliers. I remembered the way the orchestra stopped. I remembered walking through 200 pairs of eyes with my back straight and my father's voice in my head and the knowledge, quiet but absolute, that I had not done anything wrong. I remembered the room above the restaurant, the fold-out table, the wallet I could have kept and chose not to, the building on the 32nd floor and the folders that changed everything. I remembered Jiho looking at the floor. I remembered the bracelet falling. The ballroom was clearing slowly around me. Staff were beginning to move between the tables. The orchestra was packing its instruments. Guests lingered in small groups near the exits, still talking. Mrs. Yoon had thought she was removing me from a room. She had no idea what she was setting in motion. She could not have seen it, because she had never understood what I was built from. She looked at a woman from Mombasa in domestic service and she saw an ending. She struck what she thought was nothing. She had built her own collapse. And she had handed me the rest of my life.